All right, and welcome back to Veterans Beyond the Wire. I am Tim. With me is my co-host Matt. How you doing today, Matt?
No complaints. No complaints.
Okay, we, thank God we're a little more organized than the debates last night. We had a guest lined up. He is on the West Coast. We do go at 9 a.m. Eastern, so it's a early start for those West Coasters. Didn't maybe he just didn't roll out of bed yet. We look forward to possibly having Sean Washington on at a future date, but we talked about it in other episodes. You got to have a plan B. So we came up with a plan B on the fly. We're going to discuss some of the top tips for transitioning military members or people that have recently transitioned. Maybe you missed some of these, or you didn't think about these, or whatever it is, and hopefully we can help you out there. But yeah, Matt, we kind of talked a little bit before this. So without, necessarily going into any of your political stances, what did you think of that debate last night?
Listen, here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say that if you didn't watch it, don't watch it. There's a scene. There's a scene from is it Happy Gilmore? There's a scene from a movie where the guy they're having a debate and they're having speeches, and the guy says, "We're all now dumber for having listened to this."
Billy Madison.
Billy Madison. So I turned it off early. I'll be honest, and I have friends that are on all the different spectrums or all the different sides of the political spectrum, and I saw a lot of people who were just kind of shaking their heads after this on all sides, and it's what we ask for. When we want dramatic television, that's dramatic television. That's what it is. So,
yeah, I mean, I did see a social media post from you yesterday saying, "Hey, America, this is kind of what you asked for. This is what we've seemed to have wanted, at least in our adulthood." A question would be posed to a politician of, "Hey, what's your plan for the national debt?" Well, me and my cabinet, we have lots of plans and we're really focused on a lot of these things. And they'll say a whole bunch of stuff, but really not answer the question at all. And I was at work last night. I did not get to watch the debates. But from all of my different social media accounts across all the different platforms, I can see the consensus is yikes.
Right.
So yeah, maybe I do have it recorded. I could go watch it today at some point, but yeah, I don't think it's going to be worth my time or my investment, my energy. So just remember, hey, this isn't our best, America, because our best go on to be heads of corporations and presidents and CEOs and CFOs and all those awesome things, engineers. A lot of them pay better than being the president of the United States. And not every action you make throughout a day and every decision you make is constantly criticized. So it's just an easier lifestyle, it seems. So
right, and I think that the product of this is really because we're in such a polarized state right now. This is something, I went to college for political science, and I remember back then the conversation was polarization among media and polarization among parties and things like that. And I never fully understood it because it didn't make sense to me as a young man. And now I fully understand it. There is no middle ground. There's no moderate anymore. It's sort of you're on one side extremely or the other side extremely, and what that creates is these types of conversations where people are literally stepping over each other, don't want to hear what each other has to say, and ultimately turns into a mess. But that's the state of things where we are politically and where we are socially. I like to kind of joke around, and it's probably the same avenue that a podcast takes. But everybody has a very loud voice these days. Everybody has a voice on social media, and I think in some cases we don't know how to use it effectively. And there's almost like there's no training around that. There's no training around, hey, how do you put something out that it has meaning and it is meaningful and people want to hear it. So we watch drama from a distance. We're watching it on the news. We're watching societies and communities tear themselves apart, and the world tear itself apart in some cases. And most of us can sit back and very safely watch that. And And I think that that transfers to everything else in our world, into politics, into discussions, into jobs in some cases where people they're willing to sit back and watch the chaos and maybe not get their hands on it and try to make improvements. So it's tough. It was tough to watch. It was a hard thing.
Yeah. So as our country transitions, let's kind of get back to the podcast and talk about transitioning from the military. And, this is something you and I have done. Thousands and thousands of other individuals have done, and thousands of individuals do it every year. So just with a couple quick searches on the awesome tool that is the internet, you can find all kinds of different resources and tips. We want to talk about some of our top ones we have in mind. So obviously, before you get out, the military offers the TAP programs, the transition assistance programs, where you can sit down. They talk about some things that have worked for other individuals that got out of the military. Obviously, it's free. They offer it to everybody that's getting out 100%. This is something every individual that is transitioning out of the military should take advantage of. Sit down, get to hear some success stories, some pitfalls, things like that, things to avoid. The second thing I'd like to talk about is transferable skills. I know, Matt, you and I were both combat engineers in the Marine Corps, and at the time when I was getting out, I thought, hey, there's no way any of the things I've just done can transfer me over into a civilian job unless I'm going to work in a demolitions company somewhere.
Right.
That just wasn't anywhere in my neighborhood.
Right.
But now that I've been in the professional workforce for a while, I realize that I lean on things I learned in the military in my everyday professional career. And I didn't even realize I had those until just a few years ago. So like, as a combat engineer, when you have new Marines enter your platoon or your company, and you're doing classes and demonstrations on things like explosives, that's public speaking.
Right.
I'm not going to teach another class on C4 or improvise claymore mines or things of that nature, but being able to do a class, a seminar, speak in front of people, do something as simple as this.
Right.
Is that public speaking?
Yeah. And I'll add to that, the other skills are, there are metrics and data. There's calculations. I remember very distinctly, I was in an operation in Camp Pendleton where we had to go out and do what's called a route recon, which was to walk several miles up this path, up this mountain, and make sure that our vehicles, it was passable for vehicles and that it could support, 5 tons or whatever we were carrying that day. And we were doing measurements on the route. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I barely passed high school math and it's my worst subject. And here I am calculating the curve and the rise and run of hills and roads. And then, one step further, when we're doing explosives, I know we joke around P equals plenty, but P equals pounds of explosives. And we had to make calculations accordingly for the relative effectiveness factor of C4 and TNT and ammonium nitrate, things like that. So we were 19-year-old kids, 20-year-old kids in some cases, planning route reconnaissance, planning explosive breaches, talking about how do we take a bridge down? I mean, think about this. For most people listening to this, for most people who are not in the military, when you're 19, 20 years old, are you and your friends lugging around 400 pounds of high explosives and plugging these in to knock a professionally constructed bridge down? Probably not. And so, beyond that, you mentioned public speaking. I very vividly recall standing at a planning table at 29 Palms in California during a combined arms exercise. And I was standing there with a couple of lieutenant colonels and a couple of majors and some higher ranking enlisted people. And I wasn't 2 years in the Marine Corps at that time. We're talking about this, the mechanized infantry are going in, the guys with the air cover and the helicopters are talking, and their flight suits are like, well, we're going to come down from here and we're going to swoop around. And, we're going to drop ordnance. And then they're like, all right, engineers, where are you going to be and what's going to be your execution? And I'm, again, legally not able to drink a beer. And I am standing at this table with executive leadership, with people who are operating $50 million aircraft. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I can barely tie my shoes. And we're talking about what the engineers are going to bring to the fight. So it's definitely a place that builds your wherewithal. It builds your skill set to, soft skills to bring back to the corporate space.
Yeah. And I think that I know one of the things for me is just being able to take those soft skills you just mentioned. And if you just remove some of that military jargon out of there, yeah, you talked about it on one of the last podcasts, going in and sitting down in interviews and having that, 1,000-mile stare and everybody's sir, everybody's ma'am. Just if you take it down just half a notch, half a click from the military setting, remove some of that jargon, you have those skills. You've built those skills because of your military service. Obviously leadership, anybody that spends more than 2 years in the military, they might not realize it, but they have learned leadership skills. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, if you spend at least 2 years in the military, at some point you've led something.
Right.
And the longer you're in and the higher in rank you go, those leadership skills just grow and grow and compound. So yeah, it's just a take inventory of everything you've done in your military service and begin to think of how can I take this and form it into what corporations are looking for on the outside civilian world.
You mentioned the transition assistance programs just a minute ago, and we're going to have a guest on next week that has very intimate knowledge of those things as well. And you'll hear more about that when we talk about that next week. But, transition assistance programs are vastly better than they were when you and I got out. Mm-hmm. They have vastly improved. And a lot of that has been because you've seen over the course of 10, 15 years since, the first people to go into Afghanistan and Iraq were coming out of the military, corporate America raised their hands and said, these people are not ready to transition out. And people were, effectively falling on their faces out of the military. And so those programs are vastly better than they were when we got out. However, they're still not perfect. Mm-hmm. And one of the big criticisms I've always had, and this isn't, it's not criticizing anybody in any of these programs. It's just the way it is. A lot of folks transition out of the military, essentially go down the street, hang up their uniform, put on a suit, and then come teach other people how to transition out of the military when they themselves have not been out. Mm-hmm. And so it has created a lot of other gaps and a lot of other spaces where other organizations have come in and established themselves as helpful. And we're going to talk about a few of those organizations that exist that go well beyond the transition assistance program. But I'll tell you, the association I was going to make here is that all of those skills can be put together with a little bit of help from your friends. I know that sounds like a song, but it really is. The people in the TAP program can plug you into resources, and the people in these other programs can plug you into resources that will help you hone those skills and really polish yourself up a little bit. So you can take that raw leadership mentality, that raw presentation skill, and take out the sirs and the ma'ams and take out the rigidness of the military and essentially turn them into usable skills in the corporate space. And I'll tell you, my biggest asset, and I say this, all the other knowledge I've gained over the years is very helpful. But my biggest asset, the thing that's been most important to my corporate career, is the ability to sit down and have conversations with people, the ability to sell ideas and get people to kind of jump on my boat with me or on my bus with me and drive down the road. And that's presentation skill. That is simply being passionate about something and getting 20 other people to jump on board with you. So there are a lot of resources, mentorship, and different programs out here that we're going to talk about here in a minute that can help you, hone those skills and polish them up a little bit.
Well, let's jump into that now. Let's talk about some of those now. I know our guest, Sean Washington, he's actually employed at one of these transition type programs.
Yeah.
So we were going to highlight that today. That is shift.org. they like I'm on shift.org right now. Their homepage, the very first thing you see is take control of your post-military career. I would like to talk to Sean about this, but from what I've read, from what I see, they take transitioning military members, they put them into talent development programs. They get them with some partner companies that they have that hire transitioning military members, and they set them in a couple different platforms, and they start to feel these people out, find out what their actual skill set is going to be used best for, and they match them with employers that are looking for people with those skill sets. So they're not only doing a service for the transitioning military member, they're also doing a service for their partner employers. So if it's one of those round peg square hole things, or vice versa, you're trying to match up the skills you have with an employer, because the more your skills match with what that employer is looking for, the chances of you finding success, being promoted in a quick manner is going to be multiplied greatly by places like that. So sadly, Sean's not here. He can't really go into depth about shift.org, but I did want to highlight that, even though he's not here today. Matt, what are some other ones you like?
Yeah, so along with shift.org, there are some other programs that are very similar that a lot of companies should be taking part in, and a lot of candidates should be looking at when they're leaving the armed forces. And a lot of these programs, as I mentioned, they are similar to each other. There is an opportunity through the Department of Defense. Again, back to this conversation about people leaving the military for a decade and a half, and missing out on opportunities in transition. One of the conversations that came about is that, the military does a really good job of training people to be in the military, but it hasn't traditionally done a very good job of training people to get out of the military. And admittedly, that's not their job. If you look at the way that we get people to join the military, people join the military historically because they want to serve their country. They want to gain valuable skills for their future. They want money for college, any number of things. And by the way, it is a common conversation that I have that the military is not full of people who had nowhere else to be. It's full of some of the smartest, most driven, educated people that I know. In fact, and I think we've talked about this in one of our first podcasts, the military consists of more high school degrees, high school diplomas, college degrees, and advanced degrees than its comparative civilian population. So you've got a lot of people in there that have a lot of education under their belt. The DoD decided that they have to do a better job of connecting people with resources and opportunities when they're coming out of the military. Otherwise, the future population would not want to join the military if they saw so many people coming out and having a lack of success. So there are programs that exist, like the DoD Skill Bridge program, Hiring Our Heroes, fellowships. All of these things kind of operate on a similar MOU, a memorandum of understanding that basically the military bases and the commands and the Department of Defense will allow people to leave the military a few months early to go work with a company and continue to get paid by the armed forces. Mm-hmm. So if you are 6 months from leaving the military and you land an internship with a company through one of these programs, you can effectively go work for that company for free. In other words, the company doesn't have to pay you. The Department of Defense continues to pay you. And the idea of the program is that it's allowing you to ramp up your skills and get familiar with an industry before you actually exit the military. So these are available to virtually anybody leaving the armed forces under honorable conditions. And there are a ton of companies out here looking for appropriate candidates. I know that, I look for people with skilled trades and different professional backgrounds. I know that a lot of other companies are looking for those skilled trades people as well. So Skill Bridge, Hiring Our Heroes, the fellowship programs there within, Shift, they all do a lot of similar work where they're connecting candidates to these different pieces, these different bodies of work.
Yeah, man, that's a fantastic list. The next thing on my list would have been connect with recruiters and headhunters who focus on military to civilian transition. Matt, this is right up your alley. This is actually what you do. You are a recruiter for a company. Obviously, with your military background, I know that finding veterans that can be successful in the civilian world has to feel great to you. So as a recruiter, I'm going to lean on you hard here. As a recruiter, what are you looking for? What are your Joe Blow recruiter? What's a recruiter looking for? How does fresh out of the military Tim find a recruiter? How does fresh out of the military Tim go about doing this? How do we connect?
There are so many ways to answer this question, but I would say a couple of things. First, and again, I think we may have discussed this in an earlier podcast. Right now, particularly with the COVID crisis and everything that's happened in the last 6 or 7 months, there's an abundance of people still leaving the military. The military is still transitioning these 200 to 250,000 people a year, except a lot of these people are getting out into a job market that largely doesn't have jobs for them. And so that's one piece just to bear in mind. This is applicable to people who are already out of the military and people who are non-military. A lot of people have suffered a bit in the last few months. And the reason I'm saying that is because all of the advice out there is to start networking and asking questions and knocking on doors. And, anybody who has been in this job search category or status in the last few months has probably experienced this, that there are a lot of people knocking on doors. And I'll say this from a recruiter standpoint, I get a lot of messages, so much to the point that I can't keep up with them in some cases. So first piece of advice there to anybody is bear with us. Bear with the resources. I would say that some of the resources are probably overwhelmed right now. But that's not to say that things won't recover. In fact, I see them recovering. I already see them recovering. We already have a little bit more capacity and things are starting to flow a little bit better. So that's, one piece of fatherly advice that I would give anybody in that regard. And this isn't just exclusive to transitioning military. This is talking about people who are already out of the military or anybody listening who's not even serving in the military or never did. The advice is the same. Secondly, and I'll say this advice is the same for anybody too. When recruiters look at candidates, we are ultimately hiring the best person for the job. And I say this because I've had conversations with people before where they say, "Hey, I didn't get selected for this job. You must not be interested in hiring veterans." Age-old question. It's a conversation that comes up in social media quite a bit. It's simply not true. Companies are tripping over themselves, and we're going to talk about a list of employers that are available to everybody. Excuse me, that are available to everybody to see. You can, essentially go into this list and see which companies have really dedicated resources to this. What's happening, imagine yourself as a business owner with $10,000 in your pocket, and that $10,000 is all you have to make an investment to grow your business. Although you might be looking at some decently qualified candidates who are leaving the military, ultimately the person that you're going to pay that $10,000 is the person who has maybe some years of experience behind them and a track record of success in whatever business you're in. So just bear that in mind. If you're looking at a job description, make sure that you have some or most of what it's asking for, and then accordingly take your resume and try to formulate it so that it meets those criteria without fibbing, of course. Ultimately, what that does is it helps you to go and be able to apply for a job or communicate or connect with a recruiter or a hiring manager on some sort of social media network like LinkedIn, and go into that person and say, "Hey, I have much of what you need. Can we have a conversation about this job?" This is opposed to coming in with a resume like I had when I got out of the military: explosives, demolitions, and I can shoot a machine gun. I can take apart a 50 cal machine gun and put it back together in a minute and a half. Are you going to hire me to be your CEO? Absolutely not. You're not going to touch me. You're not going to touch me with a 10-foot pole. So that's a common conversation. Connect with the people inside of these businesses and ask them for a little bit of advice. Don't go headlong in and say, "Hey, I need a job. Can you help me get a job?" That's not what they do either. And I know I'm giving some brutal truths here, but recruiters and hiring managers are not, they're not job search technicians. They are, again, they're working for businesses. They're trying to make sure that the connection is the right connection, and that they can plug you in and not spend a whole bunch of time trying to get you where it needs to be. I say all of this, and as I mentioned, it's a brutal truth, but our audience here is prior military, and in the military, that's how we communicate with each other. We don't beat around the bush. We say what needs to be said. And that is what needs to be said. It's the unfortunate truth of it, but connect with the headhunters, connect with the resources that are out there to support you. There are different hiring entities. We mentioned like the shift.orgs and some of the other organizations. Those are organizations that are there to help you bridge that gap. But dropping in on the CFO of a company and saying, "Hey, I'd really like to take a job that you have posted," it's probably not going to work that way. Probably not. There are probably a few exceptions.
Yeah. The next thing on my list is play up your strengths as an ex-military candidate. And you mentioned having a good resume. Along with a resume comes the cover letter. And this is where I feel that playing up those strengths can really be beneficial. I know some of the strengths that all military members have is the precise communication. Communicating in the military, especially in a combat forward unit, has to be pinpoint and precise at all times. So being able to communicate effectively is always one of our strengths. Individual accountability, being able to step up and say, "Hey, listen, that was me. I messed this up. Here's what we can do better. Next time. I've learned from it. We've all learned from it. We're going to grow from this." Those sort of things. Those are employers love when someone is accountable for their actions. Right. Impeccable execution and natural leadership. I talked about the leadership earlier, and I also want to bring up the ability to handle stress and stressful situations. Civilian stress in a civilian job is definitely different than military stress. But at the root of it, stress affects individuals the same way. It doesn't matter what the cause of the stress is. The physical reaction to the stress is the same. And being able to handle that physical reaction your body's having, your mind is having, is something that I think most military members are fantastic at. So being able to highlight those, that is really what the cover letter is for. Talk about your skills and how those will effectively help you not only get this job, but succeed in this job and help the company move forward, because that's what companies are looking for. They want to bring someone in that's going to add value to their service or their product.
Right. I'd add to that too, that, unless you're looking at an entry-level job, a mid-level or experience level job, they're also looking for somebody who can come in and hit the ground running, with very little maintenance, with very little teaching capacity and things like that. So, again, some of the programs I mentioned before offer companies a cost-neutral way. Really, it's hard for them to say no to these programs. It's a cost-neutral way to bring you in and get you spun up in their job into a supervisory level or managerial level role. And I say that because if you're applying for an entry-level job, then there's going to be the expectation that you have no experience or very, very little experience, and they just need your raw talents. But coming into applying for a middle-level job that requires 5 years of experience during a networking conversation or interview, it's unlikely that they're going to look favorably upon somebody who goes, "Hey, by the way, I have no idea what your industry does." And that's, brings me into another point, though, that candidates who don't do their homework. I had this conversation with a candidate yesterday, a very, in my opinion, a very well put together candidate who understands what the way forward is. And I said, it's so refreshing to talk to somebody who's done their homework, because you don't know how many people come in the door and or knock on the virtual door, the LinkedIn door, and are interested in a position, but haven't done any homework on any industry. And it's not just the industry for which I'm hiring, but haven't done any homework on what they want to do next. And that requires some self-reflection. Well, what do you want to do in your career? And if the answer is, I don't really know, it's going to be a hard way to sell you to a hiring manager. So do some reflection. And even if you have to, you can change along the way. You can always, you can always change your shirt down the road. You know what I mean? you don't have to make all these decisions as you're still wearing the uniform in the military, but have some sort of idea of what your future looks like, some sort of idea. And I say that, if you got to change it 3 years down the road, change it. Nobody's going to come back and say, hey, 3 years ago, you said this is what you wanted and now it changed. Doesn't work that way. But what we're looking for typically is somebody who kind of has it put together. They want to know, they already have a full understanding of where they want to end up. So just a couple more pieces of advice there.
And you've mentioned this walking out of an interview or going to hand in that physical resume and not getting the feedback you're looking for, or the interview didn't go the way you wanted it to, and you end up sitting outside in the parking lot and beating on that steering wheel. Listen, it's great to have that, hey, this is my path. This is what I'm going to do. It might take time. Don't put all your eggs in just that one basket thinking, if I don't get this, I have no other plan.
Right.
Be willing to say, hey, this is my 5-7 year goal. When I get out, I might not land this thing immediately, but how can I continue to work towards that? So, Matt, you mentioned about being in some sort of managerial role coming out of the military. You get with one of these programs, they send you out a few months before you actually get your DD 214 and begin your actual transition. You really like one of these positions, that company, just at this moment, maybe you're not exactly what they're looking for. And so you don't get that job you really thought you wanted and you thought you were going to get. All right, have a plan B. Find something that's close that you can land. Get in there and just hustle. Just put your hands in the dirt and get dirty. Roll around in it. Just dig up everything you possibly can. Soak as much knowledge up as you can. Stay in contact with the people that are associated with where you want to be and who you want to be and where you want to go. And as you continue to push and get dirty and soak this stuff up, keep in contact with them. Let them know, hey, listen, these are the steps I've taken. This is what I've learned. Let me know when that position comes back open, because I'm ready now.
Yeah. And you're not going to land your forever job, and rarely you're going to land your forever job right out of the military. And that's another conversation that I frequently have with people, is that it's not this job you want. It's what comes later on down the road. And if I had to walk anybody through my own career out of the Marine Corps, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't always pretty. I've had trip ups as a middle senior level leader. I've moved around a little bit and taken missteps in my own career. And I say that those are missteps. They're things that I hoped worked out and didn't work out. I found myself as a job seeker in recent years, looking for another opportunity because the opportunity that I was in it didn't match my values. It didn't match what I wanted. And so I think that that's the other, we discussed this quite a bit, the emotional toll of transition out of the military, or the emotional toll of switching jobs in general. Again, trying to generalize this enough for anybody who is not military to hear it. Everybody goes through this. It is not unique to you. It's not unique to just the military transition. There's a lot of sideways movement. In a previous company I worked for, we used to talk about how your career is not always a ladder, and sometimes it's a lattice. It's it goes sideways and goes up and down. And there are people that have taken steps backwards to take step forward. And that happens. So it's just bearing in mind that, you might think, for example, in the military, that you can get out of the military and hop into the CEO position because that's essentially what you did in the military after 20 years. Highly unlikely. You got to remember that you don't know the industry in which you're trying to jump. And so you just have to bear that in mind. It's not always going to turn out the way you want it to turn out, but as long as you are prepared for that turnout, as long as you're prepared for things to always not go as you planned, just like military operations. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we stepped off with a mission on hand and it didn't work out. Let's call it 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Things didn't work as planned. And I think I still carry that mentality that something that I do in business, I'm fully prepared for it not to work. I'm fully prepared for it not to work because as I'm fully prepared, and I know some people would say, well, if you have a plan B, then that means you're willing to fail at plan A. Sometimes it's out of your control. And that's how business works. It's not always within your control. So you have to be prepared to say, I'm fully aware, 100% of me is fully aware that this might not work out. I need to have some other path. I need to have the mental preparedness for this to come crashing down. And as long as you do that, you won't be disappointed when it comes crashing down because you'll already have thought about what's my contingency.
Yeah, you have that parachute ready.
Right.
You kind of mentioned it. I kind of mentioned it as well about having that plan B, and people say, well, then you're already planning on plan A to fail. Yes, in some manner you are, but you mentioned that not all of this is within our control. You go into an interview and you flub the interview. At that point, it's out of your control.
Right.
Those hiring managers are they're gonna make the best decision that they think is going to help their company, because their job's on the line. If they hire incompetent candidate after incompetent candidate, then at some point the company's going to say, you're not very good at your job. We have to remove you. Right. So, you have no control over who they hire. So just, you have to understand that I don't have full control. I am not God. Right. I can't bend this to my will.
And there's always somebody sitting in the back going, oh, no. I'm in control of my destiny. I'll give you a great example of how things can change day to day. And let's use the COVID crisis. There are people who were riding the wave of the best economy America has seen. Jobless rates were historically low. The veteran unemployment was historically low. People were getting rich on the economy, getting rich off the stock market, making strong investments. I know around my hometown, I'm watching restaurants open. You name it.
Yeah, small businesses were flourishing.
Right. Everything was open. There's the constant conversation about how retail is having a little bit of a struggle, but that's the evolution of e-commerce and technology. But use the restaurants as an example. Restaurants being built, opens its doors down the street, and then boom, COVID. Everything shut down here for, let's call it a month, a couple of weeks. Right then and there, I can't tell you how many businesses I've seen that did not reopen after this. And that is a variable that, I'm using restaurants as an example. A lot of people lost their jobs and are still unemployed, that are in the corporate space too. A lot of people have been furloughed. Those are the variables that I'm talking about that are outside of your control. Now, what is in your control is, again, having that plan B where you're kind of like, I have, the people who have a side hustle, for example, or some side investments or a savings account. The other thing is that I read 15 or 20% of America actually has a savings account or actually has money in reserve. And most everybody is in so much debt or living paycheck to paycheck that they wouldn't be able to, to pay the bills if they lost their job for a month or two. That is a great example of having preparedness. I look around my house, and if I have 3 TVs and 2 cars in the driveway and all the subscriptions on my Fire TV, all the HBOs and all the Netflix and things like that, there's places I could cut. If things went south, I could slash it all. And in some cases, we've slashed it all, even as in preparedness for, oh no, what might happen. So plan Bs are well beyond just your resume and your job and your interview. Plan Bs can be for literally anything that comes along in society. You go to show up for an interview and the power goes out that day. It's out of your control. You're not going to sit down and interview in a company when the power's out. And then they have to reschedule you for 3 weeks down the road. Well, guess what? If you're unemployed, it's 3 more weeks now that you're going to be able to interview, and probably a month and a half before you start getting paid. Have those plan Bs. Look for ways to prepare yourself emotionally, physically, financially. Look for those ways to prepare yourself for chaos, for crisis. And I don't know if that's unique to us Marines, but that's, from day one, we were forged in that, hey, I've got all my stuff together and somebody's going to come tip my footlocker over and dump all my stuff out on the floor,
because you could be completely squared away.
Right.
The guy two guys down is not. And because of that, everyone is now dealing with chaos.
Yeah.
Completely out of your control.
The same thing happens in companies too. Sorry to keep going on it, but the same thing happens in companies. You could be the best employee in your company, but if that company has been mismanaged and then one day it shuts down. We saw this 10 years ago, 12 years ago in the recession. Bunch of companies, Enron was one of the big names that you saw in the media. Leadership tore it down. And so, it happens. It happens in day to day. It happens in business.
Absolutely. And then, you're the best employee that no longer has a job.
Right.
I know personally, the company I currently work for had big plans going into 2020, had all these projects, expansions, things of that nature. And then, coronavirus hit, and so many of those got put on hold or just completely nixed. So not only did that affect current employees, but by expanding locations, by building new locations, you're then looking to add jobs. So potential employees are no longer potential.
Right.
Who knows where they go. I wanted to bring up one last thing, I guess two last things. The one would be just network. Mm-hmm. Especially today, there are, we constantly, I think every episode we have at least mentioned LinkedIn in one way, shape, or form, but that is a fantastic digital network, a professional digital network for you to go out there, find individuals in that setting, in that field. You can find recruiters, hiring managers. You can find military, former military members that are now holding the jobs you desire. Mm-hmm. And you can connect with them. You can have conversations with them. You can ask them about their transition. You can ask hiring managers, what exactly are you looking for? Here's the skills I bring. I think I match at least half or more than half of these. I don't have everything on your list, but I know I could do this job. Here's what I bring. What are you looking for? And just being able to have those conversations without having to jump in your car and drive here, there, and everywhere else to try to track these people down and wait outside their buildings till they go to lunch to have these conversations and look like a psycho. It's a fantastic service that's out there and it's free. So there's no reason you shouldn't be doing and taking advantage of these things. You have to network. The more networking you do, and it's simply job reconnaissance. Mm-hmm. It's all it is. While we've talked and hit it on this 100 times already today, but having that plan A, having it all go wrong, the ability to have a plan B is based off your reconnaissance. Okay, this is what we think works best. If this doesn't work, this is what we can do.
Right.
I know anytime my family goes anywhere we've never been before, my brain, my wife hates this about me sometimes. Let's say I was gonna come visit Matt in the greater Cincinnati area. I have personally never been to Cincinnati. The week before I take that trip out to Cincinnati, I'm going to learn everything around that airport that I'm going to land in. Where I can get a taxi, where I can get an Uber, where I got to go to get my rental car. I'm going to learn all the restaurants and hotels right there around that airport. I'm going to have multiple routes to Matt's home mapped out. I'll know some of them by heart. And then I'll know everything around his house. I'll know the neighborhood he lives in. The crime rate. I just do crazy amounts of reconnaissance on everything because we go somewhere. Let's say we were going to go down to Myrtle Beach. I go to Myrtle Beach. I have this whole day planned out of outdoor activities. Okay, well, guess what? Mother Nature swoops in. It's raining. It's going to rain all day. Guess what? I also know all these indoor activities we can do that are all right here in the same area. Right. Just because that's how I am. I have all these different plan Bs, all these different maps. And here's how we can continue to have our objective is fun. How can we continue to have fun despite the weather not cooperating?
Surprises are great for Christmas and birthdays, but not for vacations.
Yeah.
You'd also know in Cincinnati that you have some food staples like Skyline Chili and La Rosa's. If they're listening, like those are the Cincinnati staples. Grater's ice cream. Just had to throw that in there, but these are, delicious Cincinnati staples.
Yes, if I ever do make it out that way, I've been wanting to try Skyline for years and years. So that would actually probably be my first stop. I'd probably show up to your place with like a chili stand right about here. Like, oh man, that was amazing.
Yep, it is. It's delicious stuff. You can get it shipped to you through Amazon. So
nice.
Yeah,
there you go. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up on today's discussion is find the right veteran job. There are plenty of companies out there that say we are military friendly and we hire our heroes, we hire our veterans. But I mean, anybody can put that out there. I could have a company that makes widget XYZ and say we are one of the top military friendly employers in the nation.
Right.
Nobody's fact checking this necessarily, but there are.
Right.
There actually is. There's a list out there, militaryfriendly.com. You can go here and you can actually find a list, and they rank and rate actual employers as to how they actually do when it comes to hiring and being military friendly. So Matt, I know your current employer is on this list. You guys actually are the gold standard. So let's just talk about what that takes. What does the gold mean for a company that is, military friendly?
Yeah. And you're right. Something that I want to touch on is that companies can come in and fill out surveys and put media out and put content out that says, hey, we're hiring military. And you see a lot of that in the end. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of organizations that have a lot of dedication and dedication of resources and money and things like that they're trying to attract military talent. And I am in one of those programs. There are a lot of people working behind the scenes to make it happen the right way. But there are, at the end of the day, there are companies that are going to hire the best person for the job, if it happens to be a veteran or not. It's not like the opportunity is suddenly created because you're military and you have no experience. Hey, we'll just give you the job anyway. Now, on the other side of that, it's the programs that we build and that a lot of these companies build to take that entry-level person, that person with no experience, and get you spun up, which is through some of those programs I mentioned before, through the Skill Bridge programs and the fellowship programs, and through different organizations like Shift.org. The company is able to take you as the candidate and mold you into what they need you to be with very little risk. And when I say risk, it's, we're talking about bringing on a full-time employee with no experience and trying to get you spun up into an industry that you might not like, you might not enjoy it, versus taking kind of a test drive and getting you spun up in sort of a test drive environment where you could say, hey, after 5 months, I don't like this, I want to go somewhere else. So I've done these surveys a number of times through my career, and they are painstaking in a good way. And I say that because I think that there's the notion that a lot of these surveys are done, they're pay to play. Companies have to pay for a ranking on there, and it's simply not true for most of them. The surveys are encompassing of budgets around hiring military, specific programs around hiring military, hiring numbers, retention rates, how many people are working in these programs full-time and part-time. So they I could talk about it for a while, but ultimately what it comes down to is being able to show proof that we are dedicating a lot of resources and time to these things, and that we are involved philanthropically with different organizations, and that we are, showing proof that we're hiring a lot of military into different variations of positions. So it's one thing if you're hiring all entry level, if you're hiring people to run a cash register, also probably in that ranking, if you're trying to get to the top of that ranking, it's also, hey, what supervisory level people you're hiring, what managerial level people are you hiring? Do you have any executives that are veterans? And so that's what all goes into those different surveys and those different rankings. At the end of the day, these are companies on those lists that have even taken the time to do the surveys, and taking the time to do the surveys requires some dedicated time and resources and statistics and metrics and things like that. These are companies that realize the value of prior military. And I know that my experience Tim, is different from your experience, is different from the sailor down the street to the airman down the street to the soldier down the street. We all have a different experience. So it's not like these companies are saying, we want to hire a military because they're all like this. It's that they have recognized that the different disciplines and the different experiences and certifications and qualifications and different learnings that come out of the military, the different experiences as a whole that come out of the military are good for different parts of their business. And thusly, they typically have people dedicated to connecting prior military with their opportunities. And they probably have programs that will develop you into those. So I'd say check out that list. And most of those companies have people. You can go find them on LinkedIn, as Tim mentioned. Go find them on LinkedIn and see who that person is. And if you find a job that matches some of your background, go ask that question. Hey, I found this job. I'd really like to have a conversation about it. If it's not a fit, it's not a fit. But I'd love to figure that out before just dumping a resume into what I call the black hole of applications. And that's where 300 people apply for a job. And, in a lot of cases, the recruiters simply don't have time to look at all of those and scan through all of those resumes. What they're looking for are a handful of top fitting candidates. As we mentioned before, network. You have to connect to your network because that's how you get connected to opportunities. It's how you get to take a job that you have 75% of the skills needed and get connected to it versus just being another resume in a stack. I have 75% of what this needs. I'm willing to learn the other 25%. Tell me what I need to do to get there. That's the question that needs to be asked. So these are companies that have largely dedicated themselves to answering those questions and maybe even matching up that 75% and saying, hey, we'll teach you the rest. Come on in. So great list to go check out. And there are a handful of lists out there. You can look up top military employers. You can do a quick Google search. There are a few lists. And what you'll find is that a lot of the same companies are on all of those lists.
Well, yeah, the one I'm looking at is militaryfriendly.com. It's sortable by gold, silver, bronze, top 10. You can look at the entire list. There's tons of companies that make up the entire list. I've currently filtered it down to the gold. We have energy companies, we have trucking and transportation, telecommunications. There's airlines on here. There's defense companies. There's manufacturing. Things like hospitality, hotels, things like that, hotel chains, financial services. There are different avenues, on here. It's not just, it doesn't seem to just be, hey, like all these defense companies are your top military hires. There's
right.
plenty of defense companies on here, like Lockheed Martin, but
yeah,
you don't have to stay in that avenue, that road.
Right. And another note on that topic is that if you're looking at a financial organization, just because it's a financial organization, for example, doesn't mean that you will be doing anything in finance. So all of these companies, including the defense organizations and the hospitality organizations, all of them have HR functions. All of them have IT functions. All of them have operations and support. Some of them have logistics. I've fielded that conversation before with people where they're like, well, I recommend, hey, go talk to somebody at XYZ insurance company. Well, I don't want to sell insurance. Well, it's not just selling insurance. It's insurance adjusters. They have HR people. They have IT people. They have operations managers. They have people that run real estate and facilities, all of those industries. Same thing with police departments. I don't want to be a cop.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to be a cop. I'm not going to go talk to the police department. Well, the police department also has dispatchers. The police department also has HR people, IT people. There's a whole operation behind all of these different organizations. So it's a very, I would say if I could go back into my own transition, I would tell myself, be very intentional about digging through these organizations and making connections because that's the way you get where you're going. And frankly, we didn't have the opportunity to go digging through these back when we got out. Any generation, probably anybody got out of the military, probably before, let's call it 2008, 2009. You didn't have these different resources like LinkedIn, and you didn't have the full power of the internet to find what you needed to find.
Absolutely. But yeah, like I mentioned, this I've unfiltered from the gold. There are probably 120, 150 different companies on here. All have different standings on this list, but go check them out. And then, like Matt said, if I'm looking at one that's an insurance company here. I don't want to sell insurance, but like Matt said, maybe I have an HR specialty. But guess what? Every one of these companies has an HR department. Every single one of them.
Right.
I'm IT. Guess what? Especially in today's world, almost every company, unless it's that brand new restaurant that has a father and son that work in the kitchen together, almost every other company has an IT department.
Right.
So take your skills, find a military friendly company, and maybe you'll match up. And these companies that make this list, Matt talked about all the work it goes into just filling out these surveys and things like that. But these companies are, in my opinion, are very forward thinking because they realize and they see the wealth that transitioning military members can give. It is a largely untapped pool of talent that is constantly recycling itself. Right. Over and over and over again. It is a pool of individuals and potential job seekers that are all coming out of that. And the vast majority of them don't have that, hey, I can go home to my family company.
Right.
I'm going to get out and I'm going to go and be a student at University of Texas. And I'm going to live on like a very small percentage of individuals get out of the military and have that plan. So they get out and they're like, okay, I got to find a job.
Well, and the military duplicates disciplines. So as you mentioned, that it's it continues to recycle itself. If you've hired one person that was working on FA-18 Super Hornets and they were good at that, the military continues to produce that person over and over and over again. It's reproduction. We mentioned before, you and I are combat engineers. We all went through the same school. We didn't all have the same experiences through the fleet. But essentially, we went through the same school and have some of the same basic knowledge. So if you're looking for people who need to blow things up, you know what I mean? The military, the Marine Corps, for example, produces combat engineers in mass. And so, this applies to, I've used FA-18 Super Hornets. It's a fighter jet and combat engineers. But if you're looking at Navy machinist mates and nuclear machinist mates, hull technicians, damage controlmen, facilities maintenance people in the Army and the Air Force, any of these types of jobs, for example, these are skilled tradesmen. These are people in the military who have vast skilled trades. These are people that are working on systems. Think about a ship at sea. When something breaks or an electrical system goes out or an electronic system goes out, it has to be fixed right there. You don't drive it to the shop. It's at sea. It's in the middle of combat. There has to be a person on that ship that can either fix it or create the fix until it can get real materials. And so, again, it's tried and true. These companies that we mentioned that are hiring military, these are some of the largest, well-run organizations on earth. And there's a reason why they are dedicating themselves to hiring military. It's duplicatable experience. It's an algorithm. So they're looking for you, but you have to be part of that algorithm.
Yeah. You have somebody that's in the Navy or the Air Force or even the Marine Corps, air traffic control. That it almost seems like I'm going to do this in the military. I'm going to get out and I'm going to go do it in the civilian world. And I'd imagine that most of them probably do because air traffic controllers make good money. But somebody that works in supply, it seems like a thankless job. Supply. I'm just leaning on my Marine Corps experience. Supply in the Marine Corps didn't seem like a glamorous job, but if you focus on those skills you learn in the military, you could probably land a pretty good logistics job getting directly out of the military and say, look, I ran an entire warehouse for thousands of Marines, constantly keeping track of all the gear and this and that. Being able to transition that directly out of the military. So, while it might not look sexy in the military, you're learning skills that civilian companies are definitely going to look for and seek. So
totally.
Hey, Matt, I think we had a pretty good plan B. Plan A didn't work out. We had plan B. It's not that we wanted plan A not to work. We definitely did. And we look forward to one day being able to have Sean on and have him highlight more about the place he currently works. That is shift.org. But once again, just kind of re-highlighting things. Shift.org, Skill Bridge, Hiring Our Heroes. If you are getting ready to transition out of the military, or you just have transitioned out of the military, take the time and go check these places and these things out. Go back and re-listen, maybe take some notes. Network. Find these lists of these military companies and focus on every little aspect of your military career and your experience, and find ways to mold and bend that into how that's going to help a civilian company find value in you.
Right.
Matt, you got anything else before we get out of here?
Nothing else. I think you were on point.
All right. So that's going to do it for us. Again, we go live on Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope via Twitter. You can check us out live there. You can subscribe. That way you get the notifications when we go live. You can also follow us on the audio platforms, whatever your favorite podcast platform is. We are most likely there. You can follow us there. If you do follow us on a podcast platform, feel free to give us a rating and review. Let us know how we're doing, what you'd like to hear about, maybe some things we can get better at, because we'd like to get better for you. And that also helps us get into more ears of other listeners in similar settings. So do us the favor to help others as well. And until next week, we are Veterans Beyond the Wire.